What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of The Statement. It's your boy, Manny. Today we have a lot to talk about. With the NFL season going ahead and rolling around pretty soon, there's a lot of things that have changed, over the last few months, especially taking into account of the draft, taking into account of free agency, taking into account of retirements, taking into account of what's been going on in minicamp and how those things have been looking. A lot has transpired in the NFL over the last few months, and with the season rolling around pretty soon, I think it's not a bad time to go ahead and talk about, let's call it the preseason favorites to win it all come February time. Now, of course, when we go ahead and we talk about, the season favorites and everything of that nature, one of the big things that gets thrown around right now is, the team who won it last year is probably going to go ahead and win it again. We haven't really gone ahead and outside of the Chiefs, seen another team that we think to ourselves like, hey, can they repeat? And now with Philly going ahead and winning it last year, it begs the question, could we get another back-to-back scenario, seeing that Philly really hasn't lost too much talent in regards to like losing the talent with no one really there to kind of like replace it, whereas they definitely lost some guys. They lost, I believe it was Williams on the D-line, Darius Slay, CJ Gardner-Johnson. They went ahead and they lost those three. Those are like three key standouts to my knowledge. They're kind of known to just go ahead and reload, especially, they continuously get good players in the draft that just slipped for no reason and shouldn't have fallen to them, but have. But even with that, going ahead and noting the Eagles reload rather than rebuild and what they have to bring to next season, there's still the point of there's other really good teams in the NFL that are due for a Super Bowl win and have been on the cusp for a few years and are still within their window. Surprisingly, I thought like 2 years ago the Bills Super Bowl window had kind of shut. And then out of nowhere, they kind of had like a little resurgence and showed that their Super Bowl window is still there. I honestly wouldn't be surprised of the Bills going ahead and making it far. I wouldn't be surprised of the Chiefs going ahead and coming back. Yes, our players getting older. Yes, they are. We're seeing players, especially like Travis Kelce, basically on the last year of his career from what it looks like. Is he the Travis Kelce that we've come to know and rely on? No, he's not necessarily that, but I still think 60 to 65% of Travis Kelce is better than most tight ends in the NFL. So when you have Patrick Mahomes throwing you the ball, Andy Reid going ahead and calling plays and running the organization, basically, you're pretty much set up for success in most areas. I mean, look, when it comes to Andy and Pat, they're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the Kansas City Chiefs. And because they're so good at what they do, it does cover up a lot of, flaws within Kansas City. So I think it's one thing to go ahead and note that even though the overall strength of Kansas City might not be as great, they're so good up at the top that it does kind of carry everything. Like Andy and Pat are force multipliers. It's plain and simple. They are force multipliers, and it's why they've won so much, even though they haven't necessarily had the absolute monstrosity of tools like the Philadelphia Eagles have. Like I kid you not, if you threw Pat on the Eagles, they would go undefeated, and they would be the first team to win 20 games in a season, because it's 17 from the regular. They would get home field advantage, so they got to win the division or the championship and then the Super Bowl, so they'd win their 20 games. Outside of that, another team that's pretty much primed for a win is Baltimore. Let's not go ahead and forget that Lamar Jackson and the Ravens are over there with one of the best rosters in football from top to bottom. Have been probably as hungry as ever for a Super Bowl win. Like when you go ahead and genuinely look at it, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens from top to bottom are stacked, especially with the addition of Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry last year went ahead and proved everyone wrong. A lot of people thought him leaving Tennessee was going to go ahead and kind of be, the begin of the decline for his career. That wasn't the case at all. I genuinely believe as long as the Ravens O-line plays as a top half unit, they don't even need to be a top 10 or a top 5 O-line. As long as they can play as a top half O-line, they're going to be dangerous again. And with, the NFL kind of going ahead and being a copycat league, a lot of the NFL saw how well the Ravens ran the ball over the last few years, especially last year. And it's one of those things where I'm telling you, when you have a very solid, dominant run game where it's hard pre-snap to kind of tell what they're doing, and you basically have to go ahead and know what they're doing as they're doing it, rather than being able to predict it, it becomes very difficult. Because with Lamar and Derek, you never know which two of them are going to go ahead and run the ball. They run a lot of RPO, they run a lot of QB runs, and then they run a lot straight through your face, because it's very hard, even today, to go ahead and bring Derrick Henry down in a one-on-one scenario. So it's one of those things where they're very dangerous, because as the years have progressed, we've seen Lamar Jackson go ahead and improve and ascend as a passer. So is he getting better as a passer? Yes. Is he still the best running quarterback in football? Also yes. Is Derrick Henry still a top 3 running back in football? In that offense, me personally, yes, he's still a top 3 running back in football. So it really leads to danger for the rest of the NFL. And I think the Ravens and Lamar Jackson especially probably have the most, if not like top 2, top 3 pressure in the NFL period to win a Super Bowl. I think it's pretty much between like him, Josh Allen. I want to say Joe Burrow, but we know Joe Burrow's defense is really holding them back, and they've just been a dumpster fire as a franchise from a front office perspective, this last, especially off season, but, this last 2 to 3 off seasons in particular, because it just seems like with their top players, there's one issue after another when it comes to contracts. So I want to say Joe Burrow, but at the same time, I'm not going to, because I don't think that defense, he doesn't have the full team for there to be as much pressure on him as there is on a Josh Allen, as there is on a Lamar Jackson to go ahead and win a Super Bowl. I know a lot of people are going to go ahead and say Dallas. Dallas is not winning a Super Bowl anytime soon, so we're not even going to go ahead and speak on them. But Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson especially have the most pressure on him. And I would say Lamar Jackson more so than Josh, just because Lamar is a multi-time MVP now. These last few years, they've literally just been there, just been on the cusp of a Super Bowl appearance. It's one of those things now where you kind of have to look at it and say to yourself, when are you going to win? Because if not now, then when? Right now, they are as primed as ever to win. You have a solid receiving core with Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. You have a good tight end group with Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. And even though Mark Andrews, like Travis Kelce, isn't necessarily the Mark Andrews that we've always known, 70 to 80% of Mark Andrews, which is basically what he's playing at right now, is still better than most tight ends in football. And Isaiah Likely is only going up. We've all seen it. Isaiah Likely's production over the last few years has only gone up and up and up. The respect for him around the league has only gone up and up and up. So even though Mark Andrews is on a decline, Isaiah Likely is on a rise. So it kind of balances things out in a sense. Zay Flowers is coming into his own. Rashad Bateman is coming to his own. It's why he got a new contract. So when you pair your 2 good receivers with your 2 good tight ends, one of the best running backs in all of football, one of the best quarterbacks in all of football, an offensive line that's decent, and a defense that's scary. Especially on the secondary. Forget Roquan Smith. We already know how incredible he is leading that defense. But the addition of Jair Alexander to a secondary that was already stacked, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the Ravens drafted Malachi Starks. Yeah, so the Ravens drafted Malachi Starks. So you have Kyle Hamilton and Malachi Starks as your safeties. And then you have Wiggins, Alexander, Marlon Humphrey at your corners. With Roquan Smith leading the linebacking core and a solid defensive line. You have a scary offense with a scary defense. Overall, as a team, they're much better than the Buffalo Bills. But, the Buffalo Bills are not that far off from the Baltimore Ravens. And with Josh Allen just winning an MVP, and just like Lamar Jackson, these last few years, always being on the cusp of a Super Bowl appearance, but one reason or another, he goes ahead and he loses and he doesn't get there. It's just one of those situations. You look at things and you're like, when are you going to win? When is enough enough? And I know they have their issues with James Cook right now, and those things still need to be, solidified and taken care of. But I truly do think that they can go ahead and come to a solution with James Cook, especially as the season comes closer, and they'll figure something out, because Josh Allen needs that extra weapon, because Josh Allen as a runner is like Lamar Jackson in a sense, extremely, extremely, extremely dangerous. Because especially too, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, like, size-wise, they're two different dudes, pause. Lamar Jackson is more like agile, quick, fast, whereas, Josh Allen, still pretty fast of a runner, not necessarily as quick, but he'll run you over. He's very hard to tackle one-on-one in the open field, and he knows how to run the football. He knows how to find, good lanes to run through in order to gain that first down, or 10, 15, 20 yards, and especially using, his larger stature, pause, it's easy for him to go ahead and, first and goal on the 1 yard line, QB sneak, up into the end zone, there, tush push. He's a proven runner. He's a proven runner, probably top 5 in the league, unanimously. Lamar Jackson, we already know, top 1, but those two guys kind of have the most pressure. So when you look at the Eagles, when you look at the Chiefs, when you look at the Bills, the Ravens, those are pretty much like the 4 teams that just initially just stand out to me more so than the rest of the NFL in regards to Super Bowl favorites. Now, you can go ahead and look at a couple other teams and think to yourselves like, okay, maybe this team does have a shot. If JJ McCarthy is what the Vikings hope he can be, they have a roster that's playoff ready, and the NFC is a lot more wide open than the AFC is, because when you look at the NFC, you pretty much just have to make it past the Eagles. If you can make it past the Eagles, you're pretty much set up for success. San Francisco isn't what they used to be. Seattle isn't what they used to be. Green Bay is up in the air. I mean, the next closest team that you could think of that could potentially sneak their way to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl is the Rams. The Rams have, a decent defense. The Rams have Matt Stafford, who, even though he's on like year 17, 18, is still a top 5 arm in the NFL and a former Super Bowl champion. So you can win with him because he's done it before. Outside of that, the NFC is a lot more wide open than the AFC is. The AFC is pretty much stacked at that top, because regardless of how bad the Cincinnati defense is, Joe Burrow is still there. So you already know, at worst, you're going to be in a shootout. Yeah, if you're Cincinnati, at worst, you're going to be in a shootout. At best, you're going to be blowing teams out because your defense is actually going to do something for once. The Bengals have ways to go. I think they're, from being clear favorites, they're a few years away, and a lot of reconciling with good players and getting good contracts coming back, because right now they're not a desirable destination to go to. Another team that could potentially go ahead and sneak their way into, certain playoff hopefulness is Houston. Houston, if CJ Stroud can just go ahead and put it together, Houston has probably a better chance than Cincinnati does to go ahead and make the Super Bowl, because Houston has a much better defense, especially now after they made a few additions to the defensive side. Stephon Diggs is no longer there, so they have a little bit clearer picture in that wide receiver room. Hopefully Tank Dell is able to come back and kind of be the Tank Dell that we've come to get used to, and see him be a productive wide receiver, especially in the slot alongside Nico Collins. That can be a really good situation over there. Another team that could potentially go ahead and swing their way into a potential Super Bowl appearance is Washington. I know a lot of people are saying that they're going to be on a decline, and I see where it comes from, because the sophomore slump is real. We saw it with CJ Stroud, his first year compared to his most recent year. There's definitely a drop off in production from what he did in year 1, and we could potentially see that with Jayden Daniels in year 2. But the difference with Jayden Daniels than with CJ Stroud is Jayden is a lot more refined as a runner than CJ Stroud is. So, Jayden Daniels, things go south, he can just go ahead and run the ball. So he has much higher opportunity for success than CJ Stroud does, and Jaden Daniels has a better offensive line. We'll see how Deebo Samuel's addition to Washington plays into their success. I don't know if it's going to make a huge difference, but with Cliff Kingsbury as the OC, adding Deebo Samuel is nice for the simple fact that Deebo Samuel can do a lot in the offense. And Cliff Kingsbury is a guy who, even back to his Texas Tech days, was more on the innovative side of offensive, things and plays. And, he does a lot with his offense. So giving him a lot of Swiss Army knives is not a bad thing. Deebo Samuel, Swiss Army knife. Jaden Daniels, Swiss Army knife. I believe they still have Zach Ertz there, so you have a reliable pass catcher in the tight end position with him. Of course, Scary Terry. He's as solid as they come. So, Washington offense is going to be, good to go ahead and see. But they play in the same division as Philadelphia. So they got to see them twice a year. And they got to see Dallas twice a year. And they still have to see the Giants. And I don't think the Giants are good. I don't think the Giants are really going to do anything this year. But that Giants defense, the Giants defense is something you have to respect, especially their defensive line. And then on the offensive side, you have to respect Malik Nabers. The guy is going to eventually end up a top 5 receiver in football. I think him and Brian Thomas. The crazy part to me is LSU next year could potentially have 4 of the top 5 receivers in the NFL. Because I think Brian Thomas, Malik Nabers, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase could easily all perform well enough to be 4 of the top 5 receivers in football. And the fact that they all come from LSU, crazy. Absolutely crazy. But the Giants' defensive line is something that you have to respect. You have to respect it because it's got a bunch of great names. You got Dexter on there, you got Brian on there, you got Kayvon Thibodeau there. They just went ahead and got Carter. You have to respect that defensive line. It's legit. It is absolutely legit. So, from Washington's perspective, you have the Dallas defense to go. You have 3 good defenses that you have to play 6 times a year. For Washington, that's 6 games out of your 17 that are automatically going to be a challenge because those are guaranteed defenses. Take away the fact that they're divisional opponents. They're great defenses that you have to go ahead and respect and pay attention for. So that's why you can't go ahead and just say those are all gimme games. Like, you could easily see them splitting that 3-3, or 2-4. I would say at best they'll probably go 4-2 in the division. I think they have just as good a shot as any team to go ahead and win the division. I think Eagles have a slightly better chance than Washington does if all things go well. If Washington just blows it, if they have bad games, if they give up leads, if they lose the games themselves rather than being actually beaten by the other team, then it's one of those things where, yeah, they could go like 2-4 or they can go 3-3 in the division. But if Washington is firing on all cylinders, they could easily go 4-2 in the division, possibly even 5-1. I think they could definitely sweep the Giants. I think that they can definitely sweep Dallas and go 2-0 against them. And then I think at best they'll go 1-1 with Philly. I don't think that in the 2 games that they'll beat Philly twice. They're more likely to lose both times to Philly than to beat them both times. So I do definitely think that at best they'll go 5-1 the division. At worst, I can see them going 3-3. 3-3 is like a logical worst case scenario for their division ranking. That's as far as it goes with Washington. My personal opinion, though, when it comes down to the best team or the team that I think has the best chance to go ahead and win it all next year, I know you can't count out Kansas City, but I'm not going to pick Kansas City. I'm not going to pick Buffalo. With the issues surrounding James Cook right now, we don't know what their run game is going to be like, and we've seen what they were when Josh Allen was their sole reliable rusher. Right now, I'm at a crossroads between Baltimore and Philly. If I had to go ahead and pick, I would pick Baltimore just because I trust Lamar Jackson as a passer much more than I trust Jalen Hurts as a passer. last year when Philly had to rely on Jalen to be the primary passer, they didn't really do that great. I think those first few games of the year was when they were having him pass the ball a lot more often, and I think they went like 2-2. And then they really leaned into the rush, and then that's when they were going ahead and winning a lot more games than they lost. And especially behind that offensive line, I can see why they just decided to say, F it, we're just going to go ahead and run the ball down your throat. But I think Baltimore has that same opportunity to go ahead and rush the ball like Philadelphia can, but I trust Lamar more than I trust Jalen as a passer. Now, even though Philadelphia has the better pass catchers, I think Baltimore has the much better passer. And I think at the end of the day, receiver is a much more dependent position than the quarterback position is. Quarterback is much more independent than a wide receiver is. So because you have the better passer in Lamar Jackson, that's why I'm going to go ahead and veer towards Baltimore being my favorite, because I think that their defense is just as scary as Philadelphia's is. I think their offensive line is kind of comparable, definitely not as good, but they're definitely a good offensive line. Saquon, best running back in football last year, but I don't think Derrick Henry is that far off of him. I think it's more of like a 1A, 1B situation with Saquon and Derrick, and with Lamar, much better quarterback overall than Jalen Hurts is. When you look at, the coaching perspective, a lot of people will tell you they probably like Harbaugh more than Sirianni. New OCs, new DCs for, Philadelphia again. So we never know, and I think that both of them are playing in insanely tough divisions. But I'm not necessarily scared about Cleveland, because I think come end of the year, Shedeur Sanders is probably going to be their starter. So if Shedeur Sanders is their starter, that means that their record is not that good. I don't necessarily believe in Pittsburgh because, a lot of money now is tied up in TJ Watt. I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is really going to go ahead and play all that well. So, they're out. Cincinnati, of course you have Joe Burrow and that scary offense, but that defense is atrocious. So, you're kind of going ahead and playing against two Pittsburgh defense is good, Cincinnati is atrocious, and then Cleveland still has a good defense, so you have to go ahead and respect that. But you got two good and then an atrocious defense that you have to play against, rather than vice versa. You got three good defenses to play against. So there's that. I would just go ahead and say that if I had to go ahead and pick, I would pick Baltimore as my favorite to go ahead and win it all next year. With Philly as a close second. If I had to go ahead and pick my Super Bowl game, I would probably go ahead and say that it's going to be Philly playing Baltimore in the Super Bowl. Philly will have probably be in LA or Washington in the NFC title game to make it to the Super Bowl, and Baltimore will have probably be in Kansas City or Buffalo to go ahead and make it to the Super Bowl. That's my prediction. That's how I think the landscape of the league is pretty much going to go ahead and play out. Is it going to be a great season? I think it's going to be a phenomenal season. I'm hoping that this playoffs is kind of reminiscent to like 2021's playoffs. There's a lot going on throughout the year. I think the landscape of the NFL is definitely much more wide open this year than in years past, because a lot of teams are finally putting the pieces together, and a lot of teams finally getting the scary enough defense to really go ahead and make waves. So, with that being said, that's my pick. That's how I'm going ahead and thinking with. If you think differently, definitely let me know, in the comment section below, whether or not you trust another team more than Baltimore to go ahead and win the Super Bowl. But that's pretty much been it for me. Again, my name is Manny. This is A Statement. Deuces.